Clare's first biographer, appreciates Clare's native gift of poetry, but refuses to acknowledge the prose. It lacks structure, organisation of thought, he asserts. From another perspective, another time, I see those journals' letters, fragments of autobiography, as alert, fresh, sinewy, the best of their kind. And he had to learn the difficult thing. In different places, we are different people. We live in one envelope with a multitude of voices, lulling them by regular habits of rising, labouring, eating, taking pleasure and exercise, other selves in suspension, slumber but remain wakeful. Walking confirms identity. We are never more than an extension of the ground on which we live. Iain is the master of the arresting paragraph and the verbless sentence, often, which keeps you on your toes and makes you see quite how always on his toes he is. Iain is going to stand up shortly, I hope, and talk for about 35 to 40 minutes. Renchi Bicknell, companion on Edge of the Horizon, artist photographer, who was brought up in Finella, which we visited just before now with Sarah as host, an astonishing visit in itself, took a number of photographs in the course of the walk that produced this book, and they are, amazingly, behind you on the floor, so that you can ponder them on the way out. I hope that between them, they will leave us about 15 minutes of questions, because the real tribute to a visiting or speaker is the quality of the audience. And I want to leave time for you. But I will cut us off at 7 because he needs a drink. Iain, welcome.
Okay, well, as an alcoholic, I feel free to address you. And being in Cambridge, I also feel free to be pedantic. I will get to John Clare, but actually John Clare's expression was not edge of the horizon, but edge of the orison, which was his own spelling, which gives it the important double meaning. That gaze is also a prayer. And I want to get to John Clare because he's been promised, but there's so many other things to do first. We may not arrive at him today. We will, I hope. The talk of this birthday book was a good prompt because I've been feeling since it. I couldn't believe it. It was a wonderful, wonderful gift. It was sort of best present I've ever had because there were so many people, some of them I didn't know, offering so many forms of witness, some with their own work, some with anecdotes and memories, some with drawings. It was an absolutely magical experience, and it initiated me into a state that I now think of as one of the glories of old age. It's like the filmmakers talk about the golden hour. There's this period that lasts just as the sun goes down, where everything changes in that light. And being very old and still on your feet does the same thing. A lot of the permissions are there now. Everything is plural. Everything is permeable. You don't feel obliged to discipline yourself in all the same ways. I feel very free to move through all sorts of strands of time. And you can't help doing it because one of the things I've learnt in an engagement with Swedenborg House, which has become a cultural hub in London, putting on exhibitions and publishing, is that Stephen McNeely there was telling me that what you have to understand about Swedenborg is that he realizes that we are the ghosts, that in the plural world, the alternative version of London or life, there is this heaven of buildings, but the people up there are contemplating back to these leaden souls who are here as the ghosts enacting their own lives. And that connects up with my founding statement, which was in W.B. Yeats's A Vision, which is that the living can assist the imaginations of the dead, is that the great works don't finish. John Clare doesn't finish. John Clare's amazing account of this walk, so sinewy, yes, so dreamlike, so completely essential actually continues, and we have to join the walk. We don't join it as a critique, but we join it because it's still going on, and we connect up with it at all kinds of points. Everything in life, especially at this age, memory works in very odd ways, and having been round Finella, this extraordinary building across the road, which you would never know unless you had somebody to initiate you into it, and hearing my friend Renchi's stories of his childhood there, just brought us back through time so incredibly vividly to a day in the 1960s when I came there to his wedding on the grass, and the house was a bit pinker, and so were we. And now, being here in Cambridge takes me back to a very crucial moment. When I was a schoolboy, I began the kind of writing that I'm still doing now with I can't call it a thesis, a paper, whatever, about Dylan Thomas. There was a scholarship called a Trevelyan scholarship, and you had to carry out some form of research, and I picked on Dylan Thomas because he was local to me, and it was only 6 years after he died. There were still people around who knew him, and I did that because I seemed like some kind of eccentric. And I got through to the final, which was here in Cambridge. This is when it came to the crunch, because we've looked at rooms with these big, long tables today, and it brings it right back to me, this sort of inquisitors around this table, and me standing there. And they said to me, can you recite a poem by Dylan Thomas? You've done all this writing about him. I said, well, of course I can. And I get up and I start launching into this poem. And after about a minute, they said, stop. That's not Dylan Thomas. I said, well, it was. But I mean, I folded completely, and I didn't have the nous at that time to understand that this was a nice challenge, and you're supposed to say, of course it is, and stand up for yourself. And so I just sort of folded away. But actually, it was the luckiest thing that ever happened to me. So I couldn't come to Cambridge, and I went to Dublin, which was a much more suitable place for me, where I met Renchi, among other things. There was a wonderfully anarchic community there that sort of was not too over-engaged with the university, but it was a place that had theatres and cameras available. So it was really a turning point in my life, and that happened because of this failure here. But memory, in another way, as I was trying to explain to somebody who was giving me some questions earlier today, was that it's very much embedded in buildings, and that to have a sense of yourself, you go back into a room and there's a kind of radar beam that fills in from the walls, that what you're doing is not enlarging so much your own imagination and cataloguing your memories. It's a confirmation. That thing now knows you. That thing reports on you, and you are enriched. And getting to an old age, you're certainly enriched. And I wanted to, first of all, give you the clue to where the whole thing of this project of walking and interest in people like John Clare began, which was when I came to London in 1962 to be a film student in Brixton, and that coincided with the big Francis Bacon first retrospective at the Tate Gallery. And there were two images in there which zoned in on me and which informed everything that follows, and we'll come around to them in the end. And this is just a little extract from the book about the photographer John Deakin that was mentioned earlier. Memory is contained in architecture, doors, walls, high ceilings, secret spaces without names. Coming up the wide stone stairs to the vestibule of Burlington House, I began to suspect that my London dream began and ended with major exhibitions by Francis Bacon. The first in 1962 at the old Tate Gallery on Millbank was pure shock, a nudge towards a new reality, the revelation of a previously unexplored cultural terrain. The gathered paintings were themselves a journey, an unstable path into a future prophesied in the delirious revisioning of Vincent van Gogh's Painter on the road to Tarascon. A stalled walker, a pilgrim melting into the dust of his track. The seeker is burdened with implements, policed by a line of cypress trees and threatened on all sides by spears of southern grass. Van Gogh the man suicided by society. The afternoon of the crows foretells all. And then, as another kind of provocation, the white bone lantern of Bacon's attack on William Blake's life mask, that intrusive occult procedure committed by the phrenologist J.S. Deville for exhibition in the shop window on the Strand. There were further masks taken from the original in anticipation of technologies of reproduction not yet invented. Bacon's Blake in the 1962 exhibition is a carnival mask, a decapitated spectre, oddly illuminated in a private hell, hairless, tongueless, hurt by knowledge. The mouth is a surgical slash of agony, cutting through soft tissue, running from cheek to cheek, in company with Van Gogh, the man on the road to nowhere, this bridled London icon, embedded in the location where I first witnessed it, became a significant item in my personal mythology. The gouging of the cheeks, the scraped and butchered neck, the scalp raw from clumps of hair torn away in the removal of the enveloping plaster. This portrait is a proudly born assault on mortality, a signature of death in life, ruined and unyielding. So we have Vincent van Gogh on the road to Tarascon, a painting that's now disappeared. It was destroyed in a bombing raid. And the way that Bacon picked up on it, signifying the fact that the walker always has to be burdened on the way of his journey, and that that journey is the thing that we have to locate for ourselves, and it's never ending. You realize that one walk, one journey is only the access to the next, and you keep going. And all the time, the other voice is that voice of Blake, who creates his own cosmology out of the knowledge he wants for himself. He undertakes walks, but they're not of the same quality or type. He only really leaves London significantly for one time. London, he is London, and London is him. And he dies, you know, very close to the river, very close to the Strand. And curiously enough, John Clare and Blake coincide on the period of Clare's first visit to London. John Clare, the peasant poet of Helpston, this man who doesn't feel comfortable whenever he gets out of his knowledge, in the way that I was talking about the way the radar beams confirm your own identity. His own identity was confirmed by this swoop around Helpston, about as far as Glinton and out onto the edges of the fens. And if he moved to the wrong place, the shadows began to fall. Clare was a great walker and made several journeys, but the journey to London was a crucially difficult one because it was a journey by coach. The publisher of Keats had decided that the fashion for Cockney poets was not going to carry, and the peasant poet was the new one to promote. And Clare is forced to come to London and perform himself. And on that coach journey, he sees the workers, the labourers in the fields, and he has a kind of soul jump between he should be there looking back at the coach that passes, and he's not. And this doubling, this plural, is exactly the process that I'm achieved just by old age. Clare got it through his particular talents, his abilities, and he had to suffer it. And he arrives in London and is taken out. I mean, he's within a couple of hundred yards of where Blake is, and he's taken down to the Thames. And he says, it's not as good as Whittlesea Mere. And they take him to St. Paul's. It's not Peterborough Cathedral. Everything has to be remapped like a situationist map. You're navigating Paris with a map of Venice. Clare is navigating London, and certain streets he will not navigate. He doesn't want to go down Chancery Lane. It's lethal. It's full of ghosts. He's going to just sell her. He's acutely aware of an atmosphere that has not yet arrived. There's the atmosphere of the law courts around. There's that sinister side of it. But there's also where Aleister Crowley is going to live, where magical rituals are going to take place on that street in the future. But Clare somehow is aware of that. He has achieved everything normal mortality achieves, but he achieves it earlier in a psychic way. And this leads to terrible problems of splitting and doubling. He sees Lord Byron's funeral procession pass, and by that accident, again, the jump of soul, he takes on the persona of Byron, and when he's in Matthew Allen's asylum in High Beach, he starts to rewrite Byron. He writes Childe Harold. He writes extraordinary possessed poems and stays there in the forest to this edge of the city. It's a magical place. Epping Forest. You know, the one time I met the American ecologist, poet, Gary Snyder, friend of Jack Kerouac, still alive, still up there in the Sierra Nevada, went up, a man of a Zen precision. He says, if you come to see me, you must arrive at 11 o'clock. If you're 1 minute late, I won't be there. So we go up, find our way up these trails. It's extraordinary. His instructions are like a John Clare poem, very pared down. Get there. There he is. And he's with a large dog, pounces up, really takes a fancy to my wife, and we go through a series of challenges with Gary, which is right, and then he makes some tea outside and a few little things to eat, and we sit down. And he warms up because he says, I want to talk to you about Epping Forest. So I thought, oh my gosh, right, okay, we're on now, because he'd heard that aspects of Epping Forest were threatened, and its importance to him was sort of as if it was a Sierra Nevada itself, if it was something epic and significant to London, and that London couldn't exist without this forest fringe, where all of the oddest things would happen, where Tennyson is also having a breakdown at the same time as Clare is in the asylum because he's being paid for by his patrons. Tennyson invests money with Matthew Allen in a process for making table legs, which fails and is disastrous, and so has to postpone his marriage. The forest husbands its melancholy. It's a quite extraordinary thing, and our access to it came about because Renchi and I completed, it's a long story as to how we got into it, a walk around London's M25 motorway, around the fringes of it, which took a year. One day every month we met, and we carried on from where we left off before, always within the acoustic footprints, which is what the highway planters call the distance back. You can still hear the road, always within that. We made our year's journey around it, in company at various times, in Epsom in particular, with Peter Carpenter, Kevin Jackson, people associated with this college, who gave their insights into these places, and we saw the destruction of asylums and hospitals. We had numerous adventures, but the last night was extraordinary. We were coming counterclockwise. We'd come through the forest. We walked at night right through Epping Forest. Cars coming straight, headlights straight towards us, rain pouring down. Kevin was pretty foot-founded in a John Clare state, and we made that journey, and we sat down in a pub in Waltham Abbey. And suddenly it became clear that the only way out of this conundrum, of this road that goes nowhere except into the past, was that you would have to follow John Clare's walk. Because Clare is up there in High Beach for a number of years. He gets to know the gypsies who pass through the forest. He gets to know people in local pubs. He seems quite settled there. And then comes this moment, he decides, it's not an escape because nobody's chaining him up. He decides that he's got to enter the dream. He's become Byron. He's reconnected with his love, who is the kind of love of his life in his own mind, Mary Joyce of Glinton, who he last knew as a schoolboy. He's married to her in his own mind. It's a double marriage, and he's being locked up for bigamy because Patty, his actual wife, is also married to him, and he's striking back. He's trying to undo the journey. He's unwalking. What he's doing is because the first journey, or rather unriding, he wants to unpick the mistake of coming to London on a coach, walk it and reclaim that land, reclaim the knowledge of himself through that land, which is just what we were trying to do in following his footsteps. We couldn't follow his exact footsteps. We went wrong in all kinds of ways, but we always slept in the same places as he had slept. As Renchi was saying to me when we were chatting before, it wasn't anything like he had a proper plan or that he took down great details of his walk. There was no deep topography about his description. It was just that he was driven, and he writes this phenomenal letter at the end. It's really quite like something by Kerouac, way ahead of its time. It's that first impulse, and looking at the original manuscript, he's writing right to the edge of the paper. There's not a centimetre left, and it's delivered with such intensity. And he gets there, he gets back into the home territory, but instead of being able to reclaim himself, Patty sends out a cart, and he's picked up and taken back to Northborough, which is the wrong place. His cottage, his home ground in Helpston, has gone, and his patrons have got him a grander space in Northborough, but that village is on the edge of the fens. That village is 2 miles away. It's nothing to walk, but it's lost ground, and he's homeless at home. He can't be there, and after that it's into, his wife tried him and couldn't deal with him, into Northampton Asylum for the rest of his life. So I just will read a little scrap from the Orbital book of that moment when we kind of connected with John Clare, because this one journey folds into another. London drew Clare and hurt him. He remembered the funeral procession of Lord Byron, playhouses with morts of tumbling. He saw what Cockney fools failed to recognise, the living ghosts of Chancery Lane. He stayed late and silent at every function to which he was brought, so that he might delay the solitary walk back to his lodgings. In Northampton Asylum, he would become an emanation of Byron. As Don Juan, he ventriloquized a posthumous voice by an act of occult possession, as Blake had revised the errors of Milton. Clare imagined, so the doctors said, that he was being punished, imprisoned for bigamy, for a first spiritual marriage, unconfirmed by civil ceremony. His phantom bride was already buried in Glinton churchyard. Clare did what any sane man would do. He took off on his epic journey out of Essex, 3.5 days walking back to Northborough in Northants, gnawing at grass torn from the roadside, chewing tobacco, without drink, apart from a pint bought with coins thrown by migrant farm labourers. Foot-founded and broken down, he completed his hallucinatory voyage. Without maps or money, Clare fixed his bearings by sleeping with his head pointing to the north. We calculated this journey, which we were determined to repeat, was around 120 miles, or the distance of the M25 if it was stretched out into a straight line. Fugue as exorcism, Clare's walk successfully performed the ritual we were toying with. He had been in the forest long enough to understand the peculiarity of its status as a memorial to a featureless and unreachable past, a living storm break at the limit of urban projection. When Clare reunited with his corporeal wife, come to write up the journal of this escape, he gave it the correct title, Journey Out of Essex, an expulsion, a rejection, the last of London and ambition, the last of healing and mending, digging, crow-scaring, rambling, the acceptance of the dream, the multiple world. His prose is excited, incantatory, essential. He has to re-walk the road in a seizure. He has to remember, to call up details before they fade, the pains, the errors, extra miles tramped on miscalculation. There's no better, there's no more implicated account of the necessity of walking. Clare's motivation was so much more powerful than our own. The Great North Road was still a route down which everything and everyone travelled. Coaches, gypsies, farmers, military, masterless men. The M25 goes nowhere. It's self-referential, postmodern, iconic, modestly corrupt. It won't make any sense until it's been abandoned and grown over, like the airfields of Middle England, the dormitory villages, the concrete bunkers in cornfields, the nuclear shelters disguised as farmhouses. Clare's walk was an act of love, but the versions he gave the world was already at one remove a condemned cell confession, a forged diary rapidly assembled to rationalize an ecstatic episode. It went wrong so quickly, his return. Disgruntled wife, too many children, cold cottage in an alien village. He'd seen the enclosures. He had been wandering in the fields when the men came to carry out the survey for the railway company. The landscape didn't know him. He would be removed to spend the rest of his life in Northampton Asylum. He spurned newspaper blarney and false obituaries. He'd seen his Mary, alive and well and young as ever, but his walk, undertaken in the spirit of Werner Herzog's tramp from Munich to Paris to rescue a friend from cancer, had failed. He confirmed his love's death. He filled her mouth with earth. He brought himself back to reality, homeless at home and half gratified to feel I can be happy anywhere. The story is told in a few scribbled pages, an epitaph before they took him away. The diary finishes with quotation marks opened but unclosed. And how can I forget? Because these walks are always about memory. They're about future memories and past memories. And so the past memories become the future project. The crossover with Vincent van Gogh led into a much more recent project with Renchi, in that when there was the Van Gogh exhibition at the Tate, I was asked to write something about his time in England, and I started to redo the walks that he'd done, just really to get a sense of thinking about him, not with any sense that you could connect up precisely with the landscapes that he'd done. But I suppose the major one in England was from Ramsgate to Canterbury, Canterbury to Lewisham, Lewisham to Welling, which he did in one pretty connected burst. And when we went from Ramsgate to Canterbury, in a day of troubled rain, in a difficult time for Renchi, and I met him there, he was sketching the head of Van Gogh, a bust of Van Gogh, right close to the school where he taught, in pouring rain. And the sort of melancholy of this image melting off the page and Renchi going on painting it seemed to set up the tone of this particular walk. And we walked all day through, strangely, lots of fields of drowned sunflowers and arrived at Canterbury late in the evening. And Renchi particularly wanted to be inside the cathedral to kind of carry the walk in there. And the great doors were shut. And there was a policewoman standing there, and that was it. I thought, well, I sort of said, okay, that's it, I'm off, I'm getting the train. And then she said, no, I claim pilgrims' rights. And he was covered in mud, and a huge rucksack. And he stood in front of this woman and said, we have walked here, and you cannot deny me access. And she said, oh, all right. And she couldn't, she opened up the door. And in he went, and the chief officiate of this ceremony that was going on recognized the power of this, and led him to the spot that was the central marking spot of English Christianity. So that was, I heard about this because I wasn't there, but that was exactly the tone of this thing. And I carried the walk on. I started in Dover going Watling Street and came to Canterbury, got to Lewisham, and then did this walk to Welling, which was a Van Gogh walk, obviously, and an incredible walk that brought me right back to the failures, or in a sense, of the Clare walk is that we were not able to make the connection between Epping Forest and the Great North Road, because you're pushing through so many motorways that it's almost impossible. So we sort of followed the Lee further up and cut up to Stevenage and joined Clare's walk there. So on this other walk, I stayed true to Van Gogh and clambered down motorways, dashed across motorways, all that complete craziness, and then suddenly found a glorious pastoral passage that carried me into Welwyn, late at night, foot-founded to the nth degree. So in a sense, just a brief bit from something else, just to show how one walk and figures from one walk are beside you all the time. And when Renchi and I, walked down to Brighton, towards Brighton, another walk that Van Gogh done, very much his presence was indicated in the landscape at so many points. And he stayed with a family in Blackheath, or in Lewisham, whose daughter had died in a riding accident on Blackheath. No sooner pillowed in Lewisham in a dead girl's bed than the restless visionary was booted and away, rising with labourers to tramp to Welwyn, where his sister was employed as a teaching assistant. The fading stalker, that's me, followed as rain returned after parched summer months, passing the poor Clare monastery beyond High Barnet. He thought of the other inextinguishable prophet of the Great North Road, John Clare. Poor John, drenched, ditched, hedged by an endless stream of commuters, reps, and white van bullies testing the motorway system. The late pedestrian emphasised with Clare's delirious account of his journey out of Essex, that trudge from Epping Forest to the cottage at Northborough, where he'd be homeless at home. The poet's urgent report is a one-breath confession, spontaneous and uncensored. Vincent's London letters announce the coming era of mad walkers and deep topographers. Looking at prisoners exercising painted in Saint-Remy in 1890, the stalker thought of Clare in Northampton Asylum and the despairing abdication of the sonnet version of I Am. And plod upon the earth as dull and void, earth's prison chilled my body with its dram. One of the best things that happened in relation to the John Clare project was that there was a film version made by Andrew Cotting in which Toby Jones played John Clare. Well, God, now if Toby Jones plays anything, it's a national emergency, hold the front page. So, but Toby was such a subtle actor, in his absorption of what Clare was in just a few gestures, and I was sort of witnessing this, covering up my acting by wearing a goat mask and reading little bits from the Journey to Essex. But the one absolutely magical moment of this whole experience was that Toby was doing it really partly in honour of his father, Freddie Jones, a much more flamboyant actor of the old school. And Freddie was obsessed by John Clare and done stage shows of Clare's work. And he, in fact, played John Clare first on television. And Toby freaked out watching that when he was a child, because his mum was playing Patty. And they saw them, and he saw his father being taken off to the asylum. And a lot of people thought that was what should have happened with Freddie, who was quite a drinker. But Toby was paying his respects. So Toby was physically enacting John Clare, but Freddie was doing the voice. And at the end of this thing, we were just sitting in his garden, and I asked him, could he still recall I Am and recite it? And he began, and he was mesmerizing, and then suddenly he lost it, And luckily, the camera kept on rolling, and he went into that other place. He went into something. There were so many other things around. It had gone, and it came back. It came back, and it was like a wonderful resurrection. And he was so happy, and he just reached out with his hand. It was the kind of magic moment, you can get in a film, and that is in addition to this book. And that takes me back to the moment when I'm in this place, trying to do a poem by Dylan Thomas. And this is what happened. They said, can you do a poem by Dylan Thomas? And I said, yes. It's a refusal to mourn the death by fire of a child in London. Never until the mankind-making bird, beast and flower, fathering and all humbling darkness tells with silence. And they went, stop, not Dylan Thomas. But it is. I can say that now. I'm back in Cambridge, it is. And I'll finish with that. Thank you.
Yes? No? Whatever. Phew. So, like, for various reasons, I feel I'm in a state of shock. The shock is connected to a visit to my family home where like the absolute essence of the garden was a huge cedar tree, which like I think about 5 years ago it was felled, and so it was very sad in that way to revisit my home. And so I relate that very much to what Iain said at the very beginning. It's one of these it kind of pushes me into completing a cycle, and then I'm just open now, like that's the end of that. I had another experience that, just to rub it in, earlier in the year I'd created a really large mosaic shop sign in Glastonbury where I live, and when like a few weeks back in January we had like tremendous storms, and somehow like the whole of this sign blew down, but I didn't know that. I just took a walk into town, and I feel that's the radical edge which we step into. And I mean, I look up to my elders, and Iain is a bit older than I am, but I mean, I'll just finish by saying, like, total thanks to Iain, and that it is really great to have elders who you can really admire and get a lot out of. Sometimes it's just the company walking, where we've walked hundreds of miles probably together, and it's like not always. I mean, that's another thing that came out with the Van Gogh walks, the M25 walk, the John Clare walk. It's still got this essence of just walking. It's like with Vincent and a lot of these other people like Rambo. He just gets up one day, boom, and walks, and I feel that's very essential again to that radical state of mind. It's just go.
You had a very particular way of taking the photographs that you took on that journey, or it was different to the way that the journeys are normally recorded.
Yeah, I did. I thought I didn't want to stop and kind of pause and frame things at all. I let it be like a walking. So the photographs, if you get to see them at the back, they are very much walking photographs, and I feel that like, although John Clare on that walk out of Essex didn't yeah, he didn't scary. I feel John Clare didn't observe much outside, but I feel there was a spiritual and intuitive feel to it, and that was more the mood we were going along in, just an intuitive one.
David, there seems to be interference between the two microphones. Mm-hmm. Yeah? So it all swallows in a chimney. So
no matter.
Do you just want to
so I'll just repeat again. Great thanks to Iain. He's been a great companion and guide, and yeah, on a long walk, yeah, you get great wisdoms from him, but also just casual stuff. It's all been a great and continuing pleasure, and I hope you've enjoyed this talk as much as I have. Thank you, Iain.
Thank you very much. I suggest you turn that off for now, because
it's doing something.
That.
It's doing something funny. Isn't it?
Hmm?
Okay, sorry about the technical.
Okay, I don't quite. So, Sally, do you have suggestions? How this stops? Okay. Well, I think it's your old library metal. For some reason, it was fine during the talk. Anyway, questions. So yeah.
I wanted to ask about some of your own poetry, Iain. I wanted to ask about a particular poem in Saddling the Rabbit called Clinton's Fire. That it's quite old now, but I was really interested in what you were saying about trying to, as you're talking about Clare, you're instantly kind of wandering and you're talking about all these other figures and all these other multimedia projects, and I felt as I was reading that poem, like the same thing happens there as we're reading Clinton's Fire. The poem, we kind of wander. There are multiple poems by Clare called Clinton's Fire, and there's one that you kind of have a little bit of a kind of psychotic little relationship with. It kind of echoes in the background of the poem. Yeah. But I was wondering about the writing process, so the actual poems that you wrote. So obviously everyone knows your prose, and your prose is much more kind of, is what you emphasize these days. But with your poetry, do you kind of compose a poem from a... You seem to have a technique that involves kind of just, you pick a vantage point and you kind of stop there and you compose a little bit like kind of bird roosting. I wondered what your creative process was with poetry.
Well, I think it's much more like spontaneous sketching, in a sense that the prose books were written on a laptop, so I can see the page and I'm adjusting it. The poems are always just scribbled in kind of little notebooks. And one of the disadvantages of that is I can't read my own writing. So when I come to transcribe it, it becomes something else, and often very weird words start to come up. But I feel that they are the real raw material, of the whole thing. But they often they don't go through a process whereby these other prose texts have to be rewritten and made relatively accessible. The poem is what it is. And sometimes it's a sketch. Occasionally it becomes something bigger and a larger structure. They're quite important to me, but I've never felt any obligation to get them out into somewhere where they could find an audience. So, and also what I like about it is the possibility of working with independent presses, which is quite different to working with editors and copy editors and all the rest of it. With Peter Carpenter, who has published a couple of my books, it's a proper conversation. It's a kind of a total engagement, and finding a way that the book looks like the poem feels. And so I've done so many of those that nobody would ever know existed, and without those I wouldn't be able to do the other stuff. So I've actually got a huge tranche about that size to be transcribed, which is getting alarming because haven't had the time, where I'd like to get back and work on that, and I think it would be nice to get that out into a form where more people could see it. So thank you very much for asking about that, because not many people do.
Fascinating, thank you. Any other questions? Yeah. So the question about doubling deep topography, in a digital sense.
In what, in terms of the digital world,
Yes.
which is doing that process for us. You know, in a sense, I think you're competing with those technologies. Particularly when I did a book called Lights Out for the Territory way back in the 90s, where it's sort of beginning this process of walking and interrogating London. So hyper-conscious of the fact of every move was being filmed on CCTV. It was the beginning, really beginning of that. It came quite late, and largely the City of London decided that it would emphasize its particular singularity by installing these millions of cameras. So several times began to be challenged in the City of London just for taking photographs or something. And you were aware that the demands on someone writing about it changed because of this doubling. That in a sense, the only way crimes were going to be solved or dealt with is if they were in the movie. If they weren't in the film, forget it. And that had a danger, you know, like CCTV cameras were installed in a block of outside a block of new flats in Hackney, and the dealing and sort of street activity that had gone on then, because they were aware that this was a camera zone, moved inside the building where there was no camera. And a young student who was working in the building complained and got stabbed and killed. So essentially, the cameras had created, if you were not in the camera zone, you were in a crime zone. And the city was remapped in this doubled sense. And that is something that we have to deal with. I think it's gone way, way, way beyond that now. It's really intriguing. But I think it would take someone with a sort of savvier, technical point of view to do that.
Fantastic, thank you. Great question. Yeah.
Well, thank you. That was fantastic. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and really taken with your description of the walking of Clare, walking, you know, he does, and then the way you connected it with the this sort of documentary version, where you the filming.
Mm.
Movement of Clare. The Clare, I suppose, way back when I worked on him, was most salient to me was the still Clare. Clare that was down
Yeah.
in
The what?
the underneath the grass, looking out at the boys who were walking by.
Yeah.
You look at the birds next door, flock of clay, and all those poems about stillness and looking and gazing while the rest of the world moves.
Yeah. Well, I think you're right in that those are the important sort of transcendence of the native particular moments that are very of a working person who buys time to sit in a hollow tree or beside a river or whatever, and the poem can express itself, or he waits for the moment when he can write it. There's a paper inside his hat that he can scribble that down. And that's what he's about until he's transported out. And I think this is the thing. It's a kind of a forced journey that turns him into the thing that needs to walk back in a different way. And so essentially those poems of stillness are what he's after, and how he keeps a record of things to start with, and then that's destroyed and becomes something else, which I think is equally interesting because of the nature of the journey.
Thank you. Other questions? Yes, David.
So you spoke several times about bearing witness and giving witness and witnessing things, and every time you said that, it seemed to me that you were also implying a sense of farewell, that the act of bearing witness was a final thing.
Mm.
And once something had been witnessed, that was it, it wasn't there anymore. Does that?
Well, I think I was not giving a proper account then of what I feel, because I was trying more to say that having borne witness to something, that thing becomes part of you, and you are continuing to bear witness to it. You know, if I spend a day walking around Cambridge, then I've had to buy that, in a sense, that becomes a part of my memory map, And I continue to do it and reference it and come back to it. It's not that I've witnessed something and therefore I think it's done with and put it aside. I don't want to give that impression. Quite the reverse.
So rather,
Witness is...
farewell in the sense of it's not there anymore to be witnessed, rather than you're no longer taking picture, is what I was...
Well, no, it's like it's not there to be witnessed, but it's still there. Just like at dawn, just because you don't see a thing doesn't mean it's not there. And there is this sort of strange plurality. Going back to Swedenborg again, when he was walking around Stockholm, suddenly had the sense that the people he was walking through were all dead souls. They were dead, and he was... I mean, I don't have that privileged sense that I'm walking among the dead. I felt more like you can become one of the dead because they don't go away. With Renchi, we had recently a rather wonderful experience for us anyway, exhibition at Swedenborg House called Histories and Hauntings. And this was a recapitulation of a show that we'd managed to get in the Whitechapel Gallery in 1974, just by walking in off the street as you could in those days, say, oh, we're local poets, can we have a show? Okay. And the third member of that was Brian Catling, who died a year or so ago. But, you know, in this show, he was totally present. You know, everything, he was as much there as if he had been standing in the room, sort of deciding where this is going to be shown, that's going to be shown, whatever. And one of the things I showed was a sword. He cast a great sword about that size around the time of the first exhibition. But it was so personal an object he'd made for me and so powerful that I never could exhibit it. It was always wrapped up and hidden away. And this was the first time it was opened up, and Renchi felt very strongly that this object kind of aligned the compass bearings of the show. So it was in a glass vitrine by itself, and it was no sooner put there than the roof of Swedenborg House fell in, and there was a painting that Renchi had made to bring it back to Cambridge called Mr. Prynne. And this was a little, very glowing painting of the two of us arriving in Cambridge with a great rucksack of poetry books to show to Mr. Prynne, and he's opening up an underground car park to let us out into the light. And this painting launched itself off the wall at that moment and just smashed. So there you go. The dead are in our conversation still, for sure.
It's 7 o'clock. There could not be a better way to end. I would just like to say, you said fading stalker, that's me. Indistinguishable prophets, I think. Thank you so much.
Thank you.